Few events have reshaped human society as profoundly as the Industrial Revolution. Although the technologies and industries of today's smartphones, social media, global communication look different from those of the 18th century, they are all outgrowths of the industrial transformation that began over 250 years ago. We live inside its consequences every day. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain in the late 18th century and gathered momentum throughout the 19th. In understanding why it emerged there requires examining the key conditions that made industrialization possible. Several crucial prerequisites were in place: a growing population that provided a steady labor supply, stable and productive agricultural system following the agricultural revolution, and improved infrastructure that supported transportation and communication. In addition, there was a class of consumers with disposable income to purchase goods, as well as the technical skills and capital investment needed to fund and sustain industrial enterprises. Together, these five conditions created an environment in which industrialization could take root and expand rapidly. Industrialization required a large and growing population to supply both factory labor and consumers for manufactured goods. And Britain experienced particularly rapid population growth in the 18th century compared to other European countries. In 1700, England's population was about 5 million. Rising to roughly 5.7 million by 1750, this growth accelerated in the later decades of the century, increasing from 6.1 million in 1761 to approximately 8.7 million by 1801. This expanding population helped provide the workforce needed for industrial production while also increasing demand for goods, both of which were essential for sustaining industrialization. This population growth is especially striking when we remember that it occurred before the advent of modern medicine, germ theory, or organized public health systems. A rapidly expanding population provided a dual advantage for industrialization, created a larger pool of workers to staff new factories, and increased the number of consumers able to purchase manufactured goods. However, such sustained population growth was only possible if the food supply kept pace with rising demand. This challenge was met through Britain's agricultural revolution, which significantly increased agricultural productivity and supported the country's expanding population. Britain had a unique class of wealthy landowners, known as squires. Unlike continental nobles, who often served as army officers or bureaucrats, British squires had few government posts available. To increase their income, they turned toward scientific agriculture. Traditional farming used a 2-field or 3-field system, leaving a portion of land fallow each year. This wasted enormous amounts of farmland. Innovators such as Charles Turnip Townshend promoted a 4-field crop rotation system that included wheat, turnips, barley or oats, and clover. This system helped restore soil fertility, as turnips and clover replenished nitrogen in the soil while also serving as valuable livestock feed. With more reliable and nutritious feed available, farmers were able to maintain larger herds and produce better quality meat. In addition, the increase in livestock meant more manure, which could be used to further enrich the soil. Creating a cycle of rising agricultural productivity, farmers began experimenting with animal breeding, producing livestock that were significantly bigger and more productive than their medieval predecessors, especially pigs. For agricultural innovation to succeed, land had to be enclosed, fenced off, and protected. Under medieval common law, large areas were shared by villagers. In other words, both the landlord and the tenants held certain rights to the land and shared its use, rather than the land being controlled exclusively by one person. The only way to change customary land rights under common law was for Parliament to pass legislation that officially modified those laws. Squires, who dominated Parliament, passed hundreds of enclosure acts that allowed wealthy landlords to fence off open fields, consolidate scattered strips of land, and eliminate traditional common grazing rights. While these changes significantly increased agricultural efficiency and productivity, they also displaced many small farmers and rural laborers who depended on common lands for their livelihood. As a result, large numbers of people were forced to seek new forms of employment, contributing to a growing pool of available workers, precisely the labor force that emerging factories would soon require. Enclosure produced one of the essential ingredients of industrialization: a mobile labor force ready to work in industrial towns. Britain developed an extraordinary transportation network just as industrial growth began. The second half of the 18th century marked a golden age of canal construction in Britain, greatly improving transportation and supporting industrial growth. The first major industrial canal, completed in 1759, carried coal from Worsley to Manchester, demonstrating how waterways could efficiently move heavy goods. Over the following decades, canal building expanded rapidly, and by 1800 Britain possessed more than 3,000 miles of canals. These waterways connected London with major cities across England and Scotland, creating an integrated transportation network that reduced costs, sped up trade, and helped supply factories with raw materials while distributing finished goods to wider markets. Roads in Britain also improved dramatically during this period, largely due to the establishment of turnpike trusts, which were authorized to maintain sections of road in exchange for collecting tolls. These improvements greatly enhanced the efficiency of overland travel, leading to significant reductions in journey times. For example, a trip from Manchester to London that took about 4.5 days in 1754 could be completed in roughly 24 hours by 1788. Such advances in transportation made it easier to move goods and people, further supporting the growth of industrialization. Infrastructure made it possible to transport coal, cotton, iron, and finished goods quickly, critical to industrial production. Industrialization required not only the ability to produce goods, but also a strong market to consume them. In 18th century Britain possessed exactly these conditions. Travel accounts and economic evidence suggest that Britain was wealthier on average than any continental European nation. With a steadily expanding middle class, because many people were able to spend a smaller proportion of their income on basic necessities like food, they had more disposable income available to purchase manufactured goods. This increased demand helped stimulate production and provided a vital economic incentive for the continued growth of industry. Britain also benefited from a group of enterprising businessmen eager to take advantage of this expanding consumer market. A notable example is Josiah Wedgwood, a master potter who successfully combined innovation with business strategy. He produced high-quality ceramics for wealthy customers, while also creating more affordable versions for the growing middle class, allowing him to reach a broader audience. In addition, Wedgwood pioneered modern advertising techniques that emphasized quality, style, and social status. This kind of consumer-driven enterprise helped stimulate demand, which in turn encouraged further invention and the expansion of factory-based production. During the Industrial Revolution, Britain displayed a remarkable culture of practical engineering and innovation, reflected in the steady rise in patent activity. The early 1700s, only about 12 patents were issued annually. By 1769, that number had climbed to 37. Innovation accelerated further in the following decades, reaching 107 patents in 1802 and approximately 250 by 1825. This dramatic increase in patent filings illustrates not only the growing pace of technological development, but also the willingness of British inventors and entrepreneurs to experiment, improve existing technologies, and invest in new ideas, key factors in sustaining industrial growth. Historians have come up with several explanations for why Britain produced so many inventors during the Industrial Revolution. One key factor was the comparatively open nature of British society, where social mobility was more common than on the continent. Sons of farmers, merchants, and even members of the lesser nobility often needed to make their own way in life and were encouraged to rely on their ingenuity and practical skills to succeed. At the same time, Britain's economy featured industries, especially mining, that presented persistent technical challenges such as flooding in mines or the need for more efficient extraction methods. These real-world problems created strong incentives for innovation, prompting inventors to develop new technologies that could improve productivity and profitability. This dynamic was clearest beneath the earth, where mining faced a major challenge: flooding. The first steam engines, early 18th century, were designed to pump water out of mines. Engineers then experimented to see what else steam power could accomplish, leading to factory machinery, locomotives, and ships. Even ordinary workers, millwrights, carpenters, engineers often possessed impressive mathematical and mechanical skill. Britain's inventiveness was broad, not limited to a scientific elite. Finally, industrialization required access to capital, and Britain proved particularly well positioned in this regard. Although countries like France and the Netherlands may have possessed greater total wealth, much of their capital was tied up in government bonds, colonial enterprises, or landed estates, and therefore was not readily available for industrial investment. In contrast, Britain developed a financial culture in which investors were more willing to direct their money into productive ventures such as machinery, factories, canals, and mines. This readiness to invest in new technologies and infrastructure provided the essential funding needed to drive industrial expansion and sustain economic growth. One key factor in Britain's financial strength was the creation of the Bank of England, established when Whig financiers loaned £200,000 to the government in exchange for a banking charter. The right to issue banknotes and responsibility for managing government debt. Over time, the bank helped develop a sophisticated national credit system, introduced a reliable paper currency, and fostered financial networks that linked wealthier and poorer regions of the country. As a result, capital could circulate more efficiently throughout the economy, allowing British investors to direct funds toward promising industrial ventures and thereby fuel the continued expansion of industry. By the late 18th century, Britain possessed all the key conditions necessary for industrialization. It had a large and growing labor force, supported by abundant agricultural production, as well as increasingly efficient transportation networks that linked markets and resources. A relatively wealthy population, including a rising middle class with disposable income, provided strong demand for manufactured goods. At the same time, Britain fostered a culture of invention and practical engineering, supported by a steady flow of new ideas and technological improvements. These developments were reinforced by strong financial institutions that made capital available for investment, alongside a stable political system and an open economic environment. Taken together, these factors made Britain uniquely prepared to launch the Industrial Revolution and sustain its rapid expansion.